Navigating post-secondary transitions for students with special needs requires careful planning, informed decision-making, and proactive involvement. Now, in this journey, parents, caregivers, guardians can be a child's strongest advocate and guide, and their commitment is a powerful force in that success. Now, collaborating with organizations that specialize in special education, transition planning, and disability services can provide invaluable assistance in navigating this complex process. As you explore available resources, it's crucial to foster open communication with yourself, your child, educators, professionals, basically anyone who can provide valuable insights and support. And that's why we're here. We're going to talk about resources and other stuff. So welcome. This is the Post-Secondary Transition Podcast. We have conversations around that process for families of students with disabilities. I am one of the hosts. My name is Patrick Cadigan. I am a public school special education teacher, and I do have a co-host, and who would that be?
I am Meghan Smallwood, and I'm a public school transition coordinator.
All right, so we are back in the saddle, and we are here for another interview, and without further ado, I'm going to let Meghan set this one up because it's going to be a good one.
Yes, I'm very excited for this. We are fortunate to have Maria Paiewonsky, and her official title is Program Director, Transition and Post-Secondary Training and Technical Assistant, Institute for Community Inclusion at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Is that correct, Maria?
That's right.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
I was fortunate enough to hear you present to our transition team last spring, and you just were a wealth of knowledge and had so much information that I just thought it was so important for parents to hear it as well. To start a little bit, do you mind giving us just a little of your background with the education, the path you took?
Sure. So I'm at the Institute for Community Inclusion. As you said, I'm a member of the Education and Transition team. A great many of us are part of ThinkCollege. And my background, most of us are coming from some kind of special education background. I was a teacher of students that are considered to have high needs for many years, and then actually moved over to the Institute for Community Inclusion. Since 1997, I have been working on mostly transition and what we call college-based transition services, so inclusive post-secondary ed for transition-age students. Since that time, working with schools, working with colleges, working with adult agencies. Most of our work is grant funded, but essentially everything that we do is student-centered transition planning.
That must have looked a lot different in 1997.
I have to say, in 1997, what we were starting with is, let's do person-centered planning. Let's
really?
Yes, I mean, that's where we really were getting started with, not even with the college piece yet. We knew that's what we wanted, and we knew we wanted employment experiences for students. But essentially, the first two things we were working on was person-centered planning and inviting students to their own IEP meetings.
So we've come full circle, because I know those are two very important things still today.
Wow.
And then, Maria, I heard you say that you were a teacher. Now, when you say a teacher, you were a classroom teacher?
I was a classroom teacher.
How long did you do that?
I was doing that for about 10 years. And before that, I was working with young adults that were moving into community living outside of Boston. So I feel like both those experiences really helped me to better understand transition, because we were trying to help individuals to be fully included into their communities. So with the work I was doing with adults was that kind of work. And as a teacher, really doing my best with both middle school students and high school students who all were considered to have pretty significant disabilities, be included as much as possible in school and in the community.
Did you feel that was successful? Like, did you feel successful in what you were doing?
That is a good question. Did I feel successful? I think I tried my best. In those days, I think I tried my best. I think it was challenging. I think things have gotten better. I think there's more understanding that individuals with disabilities are in the schools, are in the community, are everywhere we go. I still think that we have a long way to go, frankly, with inclusive education in the schools in particular.
I agree. And in the community, I think there's still a lot of room
Yeah.
for growth.
Yes, I agree.
It's interesting to hear you say middle school, though, because I know that has been a huge push, at least in our county, about getting down to the middle school and starting that transition process early.
Yes, exactly. And there are some great opportunities when you're talking about social inclusion and even with activities at the middle school level. But it still seems like all these years later, that's where you begin to see the separation of tracking students into separate classes.
You started off as a classroom teacher, and then you transitioned out of that. And I heard you mention probably the resource that we'd really like to talk about, ThinkCollege. Can you give us a little bit of background about ThinkCollege, starting with if you were to sit down at a table with someone who had no idea what you were talking about, how would you define ThinkCollege?
I think, first of all, ThinkCollege is a number of people that are working together to do research regarding inclusive education, post-secondary education, evaluation of these programs that are being developed across the country, providing training and technical assistance to people that are interested in it. And who we're talking to is students, families, college staff, high school staff, adult agencies. But that is a group of us that are basically with small, in the beginning, small little grants that were helping us to both model what we meant by inclusive education at the college level. And then eventually with the Higher Ed Opportunities Act in 2008, that was basically saying, yes, we need to earmark funds to make it possible for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to go to college. That opened the door to colleges getting funds to create these opportunities. Since then, with money that the Higher Ed Opportunities Act actually put aside enough money for a center. And that's what we are, the center that is providing this training and technical assistance. We're helping people get started. We're helping people figure out where their funds can come from. And the other thing that we've been doing since the beginning, even before the Higher Ed Opportunities Act occurred, we were tracking where are these initiatives growing. We started off in the early 2000s. We could see that there were about 25 programs. We're up to over 328 now. A lot of it because of funds, but also because other colleges, even without the funds, are developing these with partners. And then one other thing I'd like to say about that is in Massachusetts, as I think across the country, why this got started was because in the late 1990s and early 2000s, there was a great push in our country to have this high stakes testing that a lot of states had adopted, these high stakes testing that you weren't going to be able to graduate from college unless you were able to pass these kinds of tests. And what many of us knew was, oh, wow, you know who's not likely to pass those high stakes tests? These same individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are likely going to be pushed into sheltered workshops or day facilities. And we said, we have to do better. We have to do better. We have to make it possible for them to continue their education, even if they're not going to pass those high stakes tests.
One question that I have, and this kind of goes to the heart of what Meghan and I talk about very oftentimes. In our world, we always kind of see students two different ways, right? There we have our non-diploma bound students, or the students who will not graduate with a high school diploma, and then we have our diploma bound students. So can ThinkCollege be a useful tool for parents with students with disabilities that won't be receiving a high school diploma?
And I know that's a little Maryland specific because it's not like that in every state. Because I know, for example, like New York, there's just different levels of diploma.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, that is why we got this started. Like I said, we knew that there were these students who were never going to, I shouldn't say never, they were not likely going to pass the high stakes testing, or those, they were not going to get that diploma. And we knew that if we held high expectations for them, we could help them to access college. So really ThinkCollege is really just that. It really is meant to support those students who people don't think are going to get a high school diploma.
So the ones who might need a little more support than that.
And our model at the college level is something that is referred to as a supported education model. So we don't ever expect that a student is going to be plopped on the campus by themselves. We are talking about having some kind of coaching for them that might come from the school, or it might be that the college hires some educational coaches, and it's built on peer mentors. There's usually a coordinator that's kind of overseeing things. So ultimately, it's these wraparound services for students. So it's understood that we're talking about students who might always need some supports. And our goal, like everything else in special education, is to fade when we can, to allow them to just be students. But it's understood that they might need these wraparound services. And by the way, we didn't even take that from special education. That actually came from Boston University, created this like 25 years ago. And they were talking about students who might have had some psychiatric disabilities, who felt like if they were going to stay in college, we needed to provide more wraparound supports for them. And that supported education model is something that we thought, we know other students who could use that kind of support.
We could use that too.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I love that. I love how much it's grown too. That's great to hear. Over 300. That's
Exactly. I mean, we have a long way to go because there's so many more colleges across the country, but that is a good number.
Are there many that are like, how often do these programs start up?
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, every year we're tracking numbers that are moving, but what happens is about every 5 years since 2010, the Office of Post-Secondary Education has granted funds. It's a competitive process. People write proposals and they submit. And the first year in 2010, 27 institutes of higher ed were funded to partner with adult agencies or other colleges to create this opportunity. In 2015, it happened again. More federal funds were made available and another 25 were done. Now, each time they do that, sometimes colleges are partnering with other colleges so that they're mentoring each other. Somebody might have more experience with this. They begin mentoring. And next thing you know, you have like a consortium of colleges that are working together. And I think that's propelling much of the growth is these federal funds. But some people are doing it without even any federal funds. They're tapping into their DD Council funds, or they're looking at scholarships. And that's important because tuition is high in some of these colleges. I mean, we have colleges like Vanderbilt that are doing this and doing it well. But for some of these private universities, the tuition would be a great barrier. Mm-hmm. So it's important to get these funds, but it's also important to acknowledge that a lot of these colleges are pursuing and achieving something called Comprehensive Transition Program status, or CTP status. And what happens is once you have that status saying we are approved to be a comprehensive transition program, you do that in line with your financial aid office at your college. And what happens is once you have that CTP status, it means that students can be eligible for federal scholarship and loans that they likely don't need to pay back. So that's also an important reason why with that CTP status and the eligibility for scholarships, it's allowing more and more. It's allowing more affordability too, mm-hmm. for many more students.
Maria, real quickly, as I am listening to you talk and I'm finding all of this fascinating, I always think of myself as the surrogate. I am somebody where Meghan is the transition coordinator and understands this world. I am somebody who is kind of coming in from the outside of that. So I always ask questions when I hear acronyms that I don't understand. So, for example, you had mentioned DD Council. What is that?
Each state has a developmental disability council, and they are generally sort of guiding policies for the state around developmental disability. And they come with funds, and they prioritize, like every 5 years, they prioritize what do we want to focus in on to grow the capacity of resources and for our DD population in our state. So with those funds, some people are applying for small grants to be able to pilot out something that's going to be innovative for individuals with developmental disabilities. So some states have a priority to increase opportunities for inclusive post-secondary education and training.
That's what I was going to ask. Are there states that are more interested in doing this than others?
You know, I would not necessarily be able to answer that, but I do know that for one state that's been focusing a lot on this is Florida. Florida has state legislation that's making it possible for them to develop many partnerships like the ones I described. But they also have a very significant DD council that has been prioritizing post-secondary education for at least the last 7 or 8 years, providing funding to see if they can grow more opportunities and to find out. The reason I was involved in that is the research was, we have all of this funding in Florida. Why don't we have even more colleges and universities and technical schools applying for the funds and offering this at their schools?
Yeah, that's interesting. I would not have thought about Florida.
Actually, though, I'm wondering because this takes me back a couple of years. There was a teacher that I used to work with at one of my previous schools, and as she was retiring, she had a daughter with significant needs. And one of the things that she had mentioned, and I'm not 100% sure if this is true, but she said that because so many people retire into the state of Florida, that these are people who are coming in who a lot of them have dependent children. And so therefore, where she felt like once you hit 21 in the state of Maryland, you kind of drop off a cliff, where in Florida, there was actually more programs for those older children because so many families were retiring down there. I always thought that was an interesting perspective.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I haven't heard that.
And then just one more acronym. And I know that you had already explained it, but because we deal with so many acronyms, I just wanted to kind of hear it one more time. The CTP.
The CTP, that Comprehensive Transition Program. So that is that basically the colleges work with their financial aid office to apply to the federal financial aid to say, we follow an application process, and we believe that we are doing everything we need to do to be a comprehensive transition. They call that Comprehensive Transition Program. They apply to get that status. If they are approved, meaning that they are offering a comprehensive program at the college for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. With that approval that the college earns, it means that then students can apply to this college program, and then they would be eligible for financial aid because the college program has that CTP status.
And you mentioned that might be financial aid they do not have to repay.
Exactly. It's usually the kinds of scholarships that you might not have to pay back.
And I think that's something like following that whole process, just like any other individual going to college, I think that's something parents haven't even thought about.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of people think that it's the funding that would make it impossible for people to think of. But we're talking about parents who were never probably putting any money aside for post-secondary education because they just never thought this was an option for their son or daughter.
And that leads me into the next question, and this is more of a philosophical question. Why? Like, what benefit is there?
And that's a very good question, because for states like mine that have legislative funding for this, that's the first thing the state legislators are asking. Where are you headed with all of this? Mm-hmm. But where we're headed with all of this is to prepare young people to have the kind of lives that their peers have, preparing for more education and competitive work. I mean, ultimately, we're all going for being able to have a competitive, integrated job, like all your other peers. And that's the ultimate goal, is can we do enough to help you to take the right kinds of classes, that have the right kinds of work experiences that together are going to help you to get competitive work when you end. And the data so far is showing us that that is absolutely true. For the colleges that are actually following that formula, person-centered planning that is influencing advising, students are taking some classes and getting some work experiences that are informing them and giving them those right experiences that are leading them to competitive work. That's basically what the formula is. That's what we're going for. And that is what we're hoping to do, because so many young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are leaving school really are, those outcomes aren't great. As we all know, they are not great. They're not necessarily getting paid work experiences. They're not necessarily moving out of their homes when they want to. They are more dependent on, their parents. They're more dependent on income that comes from the government. And that's what we're trying to steer them away. We want to help them to get the better outcomes.
And I have so many students that when I talk with them to do the transition interview, that they say, I'm going to college. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you going to do? And in their mind, they've seen their siblings or, mm-hmm. friends, their typical peers go to college, and they're not necessarily thinking about, I'm going to go to class and I'm going to learn this. It's more about the experience and just now becoming an adult. I'm done with high school, moving into adulthood, and it's just like anyone else. They want to just live and find themselves. And I think it's just a great opportunity to give them that.
Yeah, that's why it's so important for us to help explain what we mean by going to college. It can mean exactly what anybody else is doing, but it could also mean that you're pairing a few classes with also social activities on the campus, that campus engagement, and also work experiences. It may not the pathway may not be the same as the typical college experience, but it's still a very good college experience.
Just like when they were in school, it's a very individualized experience and process. And I think that's the thing. It's just like, for any young adult leaving at 21, I know parents are trying to get a sense of what's next by asking other people, but it's so hard to judge what's going to happen to your child when everyone's so different. Just with this experience, it's whatever works best for them and what they need. So it's nice to hear it can be individualized.
Yes.
I was going to ask too, and I know Patrick's going to post the actual website for thinkcollege.net in our show notes, but can you tell us a little about the information on the website that if a parent was to go to explore a bit? I mean, I think it's got a wonderful layout, but do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, I could tell you a few highlights that I think for parents that, let's just say parents that they start with, what are you talking about going to college? All right. Mm-hmm. So first of all, we have a new campaign that is called Think Higher, Think College. And that is a whole website that you can find right on the front page. We're trying to highlight this. And all this is about is, let us help you understand what we mean by going to college. Let's show you some videos of students across the country that are getting this experience. We have a resource guide that is helping to walk people through this process. We have resources that if you're an IEP team member, you're running an IEP team, some resources that you can bring to your IEP team, meaning for families, but also for other IEP members who might not know what this is about. We also have a college search page. That is probably one of the most popular features that we have. And that college search page is, you can look, there's a map of the United States. You click whatever state you want to look at, and you can use a guide, and you can find as much information as possible about every program that is supporting students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and get information about the costs, how inclusive they are, if they have work experiences, if they have peer mentors, if they have a residential life experience that they can offer to students. And that's probably one of the most important things that people can, that's the first thing they want to look at is this even possible in my state, is one of those things. We also have a page that's just for families and for students. And it's a lot of just walking people through what would be the first thing you would do. Here are some resources. Do you want to talk to other parents that have been involved in this? Here's where you can talk to other parents. We have a separate private Facebook page just for parents that we only one person actually monitors it, and it's only to allow people in. But that has been like another popular thing for families, is to talk to other families about this.
Yeah, that's definitely, and I know we've talked about this before, reaching out to other people who are going through it, other parents, it's the best resource just to get a real, understanding of it.
Yeah.
College campus prep. We know that this is an important part of this post-secondary education experience. So how can parents best prepare students now for this while they're still in high school?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that I try to emphasize a lot with families, that there are and teachers, because I think together there's a lot that we can do to help prepare students for this kind of experience. One is just really, it sounds simple, but really helping to promote their self-determination and their self-advocacy skills. Because when they go to college, they are the ones that are expected to manage themselves and advocate for their own accommodations and advocate when they get into, if they have a concern about something. And the more we can do to help prepare them to speak up, to manage themselves, to tell us what their preferences are, that is really important. But again, another thing is that self-management, also learning how to manage yourself. I'm just going to talk as a special educator. It's very easy for me to kind of take care of things and to keep things moving along, but it doesn't really help the young people that we're trying to support, right? When they go to college, and it's up to them to get to the college campus on their own. It's up to them to get to their class. Like, have we done anything to help them with that? No. So those are the things that are really important. Another thing is travel training and mobility around places. Like in schools, the more we can do to help students navigate to their classes on their own or to lunch, rather than saying, okay, we're going as a group. If we can get students to do that on their own, that is really important, because when you're in college, you're expected to know how to navigate on your own. But I also mean, if there's ways for them to not necessarily use the school provided transportation, even if they're eligible for it, if they can learn to use public transportation a little bit, or walk or bike, those are the things that are going to help them when they're navigating around their college campus, because generally campuses are much bigger than their high schools. And they are expected to know how to get around it. So those are some of the things that I think about, is their self-advocacy, their self-management, learning how to travel and get around a little bit more on their own, and speaking up for themselves.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head with that. I think we have the best intentions as special educators, but unfortunately not thinking of the big picture. It's not going to help at any cost, and I know it gets uncomfortable sometimes if you have to wait and see what they do, or, try to let them go on their own and they get lost. I mean, I've been in that situation, but ultimately I try to remind myself, this is going to help them. This is what they need to practice.
Yeah.
I know, we talked about preparing. Is there anything academically you would suggest that they could best prepare? I mean, I think parents also get a little nervous when they think, oh my goodness, a college class. What is that going to look like for my child with a severe, an intellectual disability?
Yeah, thank you. That is a great question. And I do have a couple of suggestions. And I always start with something that we learned from when we first got started with this work, and we would help students to request accommodations from disability services, because that's up to them to request it. Yeah. And there were typically 3 questions that they were being asked, and disability services would tell us, yeah, they're getting stuck on this. One is, can you tell us what your disability is? 2, can you tell us how that disability is impacting your learning? And 3, what accommodations have been helpful for you? And a lot of the students that we were working with couldn't answer any of those questions. So one of the things that we learned was we got to do our best to help students be able to disclose when appropriate their disability and understand how that disability has impacted their learning, which is very hard for a lot of students who have had everything modified for them. So they don't know necessarily that they need any accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing, is how do we help students to learn how to use some of the accommodations that they are going to be offered at college that they don't necessarily need in high school because we've already modified everything for them. So even if they can have things modified, I always kind of recommend, can you consider maybe an IEP goal or 2 that incorporates like a screen reader or a digital note-taking software, something that's they can use at college that they could practice using at school. That's another thing. And I always say this, don't give up on the reading, because no matter what class they want to take, even if they're going to start with like a ceramics class or an arts class or a dance class, eventually, if they like college, they want to move on and take other classes. And what can be prohibitive to them sometimes is if a class has too much reading. Every class has some reading, the syllabus, or some kind of small reading. Anything we can do to help them with their reading is not going to be a waste of time. So I always say, just think about any ways you can help them to keep up with reading.
I love the idea of incorporating the assistive technology in high school to prepare them. I mean, that just gives them there's some more independence,
Exactly. Yeah. So those are some of the things that I can think of to start with that are just, and more like using, another thing would be to, like, again, with self-management, learning how to use your phone or a tablet to manage yourself and to learn how to navigate apps within that would help you with your academics. That's another thing.
That's a good point. There's so many apps out there too to choose from that can be of use.
It was interesting though to hear you say that, because one of my first things is that now, again, I'm a middle school teacher, and one of the things that I am struggling with right now is the students whose executive functioning skills are not that strong. And so whereas I personally have a love for technology and can always find an app for that, it has been a challenge to try to work with and work through my students, and to say that there are tools that you can use on your computer that can help you when you're struggling in class, but you're going to need to focus on what you're doing, not like opening up that separate tab in Google Chrome and writing music or something, whatever it is they're doing.
There's a lot of distractions out there.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a discussion that a lot of people have, is I can somehow get them to use their apps when it's a game. I can't get them to use the app when it's for an academic reason. Right. But sometimes I just say, if we could just help them to use things like spell check, and things like that are helping them with their writing, because there's always going to be some writing in college too.
Yeah.
So even if we started with those basic kinds of accommodations, that would be helpful.
And you mentioned about, them understanding what their disability is and understanding their accommodations. And I think it ties back to what you had mentioned at the beginning about how important it is for the student who be attending their IEP meeting.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many meetings that I attend that the student does not attend. And when they do, it's so nice that they can hear all their accomplishments, but also they hear the list of different things that they have in place for them that they might not even realize their other peers are not all receiving. And, the discussion about what it's going to look like moving forward if they're going to the post-secondary level, and what might not be following them, but what could follow them. So it's just such an important thing for them to be a part of. And it's all about them. I'd want to hear people talking about me.
Yeah. as I was saying in the beginning, that's what we were talking about. And the feeling was that either the parents didn't want their son or daughter to be in the meeting, or they didn't want us to, they didn't want IEP teams to talk about disability in front of their son or daughter, or their son or daughter was going to be very bored listening to this. Well, what some people said, the minute they began inviting students to their own IEP meetings, they got a lot more interesting. People were a lot more civil, and a lot more plain language was being used, which helped everybody.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. But you're right. I face that a lot where I've had parents say, you cannot talk about the disability in front of my child.
Yeah.
And, here's a 17-year-old getting ready to go into the real world. And I'm like, this is a part of them. They need to understand this. So it just boggles my mind, and I know it's all about keeping them protected, but it's really doing a disservice.
Well, and then the other thing is, though, let's be honest. I mean, the part of it is also just the IEP meeting itself. I mean, we talk about that IEPs, that they're supposed to be for the student, but the meetings themselves are usually just like checks on the box, right? Like, we're going to talk about this, check. We're going to talk about this, check. And it's an interesting idea to ask the student to come in and then participate, because then it becomes more personal. It's more personalized. Yeah. And,
it humanizes it. Exactly. Yeah. It's not just, okay, let's get through this page. I did have a family that the daughter was, had a severe disability and nonverbal in a wheelchair. And so she didn't come to the meeting, but every meeting the mom brought a picture of the daughter and put it in the middle of the table and started the meeting by saying, let's remember who this is all about. So that anytime people started, bickering or, butting heads, we had that visual. Like, this is our focus. So I thought that was nice as well.
Yes, that's very nice. I mean, there's also things too about like just coming up with a one pager that is for students and families that anybody could understand.
Right.
If you rate it with the student and you say, these are my strengths, these are my interests, this is what I think I'm working on this year, this is where I think I need to get better at. I mean, what do you need?
There's a lot of students who I think would feel very nervous or anxious, but you're right. If they're able to prepare ahead of time with their case manager to put in writing or a visual of what they wanted to share. And I've even done that with some of my students, with the intellectual disability. We made a little portfolio. Here's some pictures of me at work. I want to share this to my team. So it's you just had to think out of the box. And as special educators, it should not be that hard of a thing to do. But I think it just gets kind of lost with everything else that's on our plate, unfortunately. Yeah. So I know we talked about preparing academically. How, and I think you touched on it a little bit already, though, but preparing our students for campus engagement. What could families be doing to help prepare their young adult for some campus activities, engagement at the college level?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because one of the first things that I do some student research, some action research with students at college to ask them how this is all going. One of the things, a strong theme that comes out the first semester is that people will say like, well, you've got a class at this time and you've got lunchtime, you've study time. It's up to you to figure out what to do. And a lot of them get kind of lost in the beginning because they're so accustomed to us directing them. Again, we are directing them. We're telling them where to go. And, in high school, even if we didn't, they've got that bell schedule. Well, that doesn't happen on the college campus. And what we've learned is, it seems so easy. Go ahead, hang out, do what you want. It's not so easy when you have not had that kind of freedom before. So some of the things that we have thought about that would be much better if we could help them, one, to like initiate plans with other people, because making friends with people at college is tricky and hard. But if you've got some experiences of making a plan with a friend and executing it, that's something, because then you're also saying, I'm interested in this. Oh, you're interested in that too. Because then that will help you when you're in a class and you invite somebody to either go to lunch or do you want to check out this college club, so that's helpful. I think also building those social skills, even at lunch, I will tell you that it's not surprising sometimes when you see a student with a disability going off to college, and they're going to search out other students with disabilities sitting in the corner at the table, But lunch is such a great opportunity to get to know other people. So again, we often talk about when you're in the class, if lunch is coming, what could you do to maybe invite somebody to sit with you at lunch and maybe compare notes of the class, or something like that is really helpful for campus engagement, but also helping students to learn what their interests are in high school that might translate to what you could do at college. One of the first things a lot of people do is like service learning or volunteering. Those are like not high commitment activities you can do. You can do that one time at a college, but it's a great way to meet some people. So sometimes we say, well, try doing that in high school too. Do some more volunteering. That's not a big commitment, but it could be a one-time thing that could also help you to decipher what you like. So I think it's like knowing how to use your time and practicing that ahead of time, knowing what your preferences are, and knowing how to follow through on a plan.
Yeah, those are definitely some great ideas. And I think things that we can definitely implement within the high school setting now. Is there anything else you think families should know about preparing for the post-secondary life? Any other tips?
I would say early exposure is what most people say. Make sure that if your son or daughter even is watching a sibling go off to college and is curious, make sure they're going for those college tours too. Help them to get some exposure to what a campus is like. We did research once with some middle school students, and we asked them, what is college? And they said, oh, that's that place where you put backpacks on and you go. They didn't really know what it was, Now that might be different now, but they don't know. It's kind of a mystery to them where they're going. So I think, having those opportunities to go on campus tours, talk to other students that are going to college that have similar disabilities would be another thing to think about. I would suggest some of the conferences that are having people that are coming to talk about these programs that they have, like the State of the Art on Post-Secondary Education, which we just had, or even the Division on Career Development and Transition, DCDT. They've had many sessions that are about college. I think those would be some good examples. Or inviting people to come to your special ed PAC meeting would be another one where we've been invited to come to those kinds of meetings, and those can be very helpful as well. But a big thing is make sure it goes on your IEP. Make sure that your IEP team knows year after year, this is the goal. This is what we're heading towards.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, that early access to this information and starting the research early on to understand what the long-term goal is so important, and to know it's a possibility.
Yes. ThinkCollege has a number of videos that you can play right from the website. And sometimes we suggest even just bring a group together and watch that video. And then we have some guided questions, even if you want to have a book club kind of a thing and talk about it.
Anything else there, Patrick?
As far as I'm concerned, the conversation is just starting. It's fascinating. But time constraint is kind of holding us back right now. But no, I got my brain is swimming. I've already been taking notes, and you've already given me a lot to think about. And it's funny because Meghan and I's partnership, I'm on the website wing of doing things. And so as I'm hearing you talk, I'm always thinking about what does the site look like that we're doing? How can that change? What can be made better? What can be made more clear? What information can be presented? So, as I'm hearing all of this stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, we've still got a ways to go.
We all do. I mean, we all do. There's never, that's the beauty of it, is it gives you an opportunity to say, can I add one more thing to this? Or I don't know, does Maryland use the summary of performance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, we don't in Massachusetts use it enough. We just don't. But some people talk about, even if you thought about the summary of performance as being a document that could help, to practice what is on that summary of performance that I could use to prepare for college, to talk to people at college,
And we have that student perspective section on it. And that's when I usually get the student and ask the questions. And I hear a lot of, well, I don't know. And it's their response, but one of the questions is, what would you like someone at the college level or the post-secondary level to know about you? And it's always interesting to read the responses, because a lot of them will say, I may have a weakness, but I will try hard. I'm motivated. It's nice to see where they recognize, even though they might have a deficit, they have a strength. So,
yeah. Well, I did remember one thing. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to say this, that I do this student research, and I ask them about what this experience is like for them. And a strong theme that often comes out is that they feel like they have a new identity, that this is what a student has told me. I'm not SPED anymore. I'm just a college student now. And that really, for those of us in the special ed world, it's like, oh my God, it reminds you of this identity that they feel like they have, but they shed as soon as they go to college.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's just, makes it all worth it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a great conversation.
No, that was an awesome conversation.
I feel like we could have many, many more conversations with her. She's just amazing.
We're just getting started, but we're kind of on a time frame here. So I loved that.
But she gave us such a great resource. I mean, ThinkCollege.net is just so much information there to explore.
And I think we've talked about that too we've included that in the What's Helpful resource. So you can't, I was just going to say, you can't use it this time, Meghan.
No, but I have another, that's helpful resource to share, which ties in nicely with it. And it's one of our Maryland ThinkCollege resources, or programs, I should say, which you can actually find by going to our website. If you go to postsecondary-transition.com and scroll over our certificate track tab at the top, you'll see down, it says post-secondary college programs, and a list pops up of some of the resources that we have from ThinkCollege, including the one that I'd like to touch on, which is the University of Maryland TERP Succeed program. And this is a fairly new program based on the College Park campus. Just started, the pilot was a couple years ago, and it's still very small. There's just a handful of students currently, but I know that they are going to, work on expanding it as the years go on. And as Maria mentioned, they are partnered with the Maryland DD Council, as well as the Developmental Disabilities Administration, or DDA. And it's open to Maryland in-state residents only at this time. But it's a wonderful program, just like Maria talked about. It promotes the campus engagement, the academic piece, just that whole college experience for our students with more intellectual developmental disabilities. Their website gives some nice pictures of some of their pilot students, who I know one of the pilot students, and it was just great to see him, and his graduation cap and gown, and looking so happy after the great experience that he had there. So I definitely recommend checking it out. They have a wonderful video as well. And if you keep your ear out, they do open houses throughout the year as well with more information. But TERP Succeed at University of Maryland, I think it's a great resource to check out.
Yep. And we're going to have a link for it in the show notes. And speaking of show notes, you can follow the information from this conversation in those show notes. You can also follow, and please share out the podcast. We are looking to expand this conversation and all the conversations that we've had to as many families that need the information as we can. So we're going to need your help to do that. You can visit our YouTube channel, where we've posted videos of all of our conversations, including doing some of the legwork for you. We've curated videos around topics that revolve around transition, like guardianship, alternatives to guardianship, ABLE accounts, and there's definitely still more to come. So be sure to subscribe there as well. And then finally, check out the website, chock full of information around transition process. Go to www.postsecondary-transition.com. We've got our contact information there. We've got our blog there. We've got lots and lots and lots of resources. So definitely check it out. All right, Miss Meghan. We're in good shape.
That's all for the week. Huh?
Yeah, I think that we are in good shape. So,
Awesome.
All right. Well, then we can go ahead and we'll call it, and we look forward to talking with you guys again soon.
All right. Thanks, everyone.